Hello, welcome to a special Monday night edition of Real Hawk Talk. I am one of your hosts, Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger. Follow us on Facebook at HawkBlogger. Even Instagram, although I'm not very active there, I have to admit. And we will have our full crew tonight. We're going to be joined by Nathan Ernst a little bit later, and Real Jeff Simmons will join in just a few minutes. But we have Evan. It's all we could manage at the beginning of the show. I hope people will stick with us.
Bottom of the barrel.
Seriously, I don't think that we could pick a better guy to start with than Evan Hill after knowing what we're going to be talking about tonight, man. It's a big day for the Seahawks franchise. I think you could go as far as to say that this is a crossroads moment for this franchise for the next decade, possibly.
I think it's even, I would take it a step further and say it's even bigger than that. I was talking with William Cornell, Hawk Blogger contributor, Rain City series founder, for those of you who don't know him. We were talking today, and I think there's an argument to be made that he is the most valuable player in the history of Seattle sports. And I'm not saying it's for certain, but I think in terms of just the position he plays, obviously his talent caliber, just the NFL as a whole, he is such an important asset for Seattle sports historically. And I think it's, I really hope this is something where they're able to work something out and retain him for the long term, just because take out the whole talent side of things. Russell Wilson is a dearly loved player and person in Seattle. He's a role model to so many kids, so many families, so many people, so many adults. I really, really hope they can find a way to retain him.
Yeah, it's we're going to cover the different angles, and as people are kind of come to expect from our show, there's probably going to be a wide variety of opinions on this topic and what to do about it. And so we'll see. We'll keep an eye on Twitter. Maybe news will break as we're covering tonight. I think we'll go for a little while here. But, look, I kind of see this, the way that the team has set this up. And let me kind of reset the overall topic for people that are just casually following along. The Seahawks have been given an ultimatum, reportedly. This was reported, I think, initially by Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times, that Russell Wilson and his camp, his agent, Mark Rogers, wanted to have a deal in place by no later than today. End of the day today, you'd assume, is the deadline. And if they didn't make that deadline, then they did not want to negotiate for the rest of the season, was the initial report. That this was essentially just didn't want to get distracted, just wanted to get this over with. Well, as recently as, today, the reports have been growing that the deadline is not just about whether or not they will negotiate for the rest of this season, but the report is that this is a deadline of either you sign Russ to an extension or Russ won't sign an extension. That's kind of the story as it's being told right now, meaning that if there's truth to this, which I don't think any of us can say for certain, there's always a lot of misdirections in these situations, then you've got today where you may find out that Russell Wilson his time is ticking in Seattle. And that if that's the case, we're going to get in and talk about that. We'll talk about both sides. If they sign, what do we think that means? What's the implications? If they don't sign him, what are the implications of that? So the other piece that's come out recently, we've talked about it on this show before, but has gained a little bit more steam lately, is trade talks around Frank Clark. And, there's some implication that these might be related. They might be totally independent. Who's to say? But, one of the key things that we've talked about in this show is how challenging it is for the Seahawks. It's an odd problem to have, and a good one, I guess, but to have so many players that are at the top of their, respective positions, and how to actually manage your roster that way. So when you've got a Bobby Wagner and you've got a Frank Clark and you've got Russell Wilson plus more, but you got those three, you got three guys that are pretty much going to expect to be paid either at the top or near the top. So, Evan, what's your initial read on the validity of the reports around the ultimatum that the Russell Wilson camp has put in place?
Yeah, so I'm actually on the minority side when it comes to this arbitrary deadline. A lot of media members have pointed out saying like, hey, what if Russell Wilson wakes up tomorrow morning, they don't get a deal done tonight, and John Schneider comes tomorrow morning, out to the practice field and offers Russell $40 million a year. Let's just say some sky high number, 100% guaranteed over 5 years, $200 million baseball style deal. Are you telling me that Russell and Mark Rodgers are going to reject that deal tomorrow? The answer is it's sort of a halfway answer. The reality is I think that deadline is absolutely accurate, because the deadline is only as strong as how strongly they hold to it. There's no mounting pressure. There's no reason for John Schneider to be away from his kids and his family till midnight tonight if they don't believe that this deadline is real. I think Russell is one of those people, and there's a lot of fans on Twitter that brought this up, where go back to his college days, where if he's not given something he wants, he's not able to take something, he's not being given permission to do something, he's going to go and find that opportunity somewhere else. And I don't think that's an unrealistic reality or potential with the Seahawks and going to a different team. I think this deadline is very real, and the clock is ticking. We'll see what happens. Reports are that John Schneider's still in the building, and actually one quick note on the John Schneider in the building thing that I feel like we've kind of glossed over is obviously. Actually, maybe this isn't obviously, but I don't know if a lot of fans know this, but Matt Thomas is actually the cap guy for the Seahawks. He's the guy who negotiates all the contracts with agents, does a lot of their salary cap outlook projections. The team is always projecting like 3 years out. 4 years is a little rough, but they have like a full board of what their contracts and salary cap outlooks look like for the next 3 years. And typically these are mostly exclusively, these responsibilities are exclusively tasked to Matt Thomas to do like 99% of the grunt work here. I think one little snippet, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into this, but for John Schneider to be in the building, I think multiple days in a row with Matt Thomas, I think it goes to show that precedent that Russell wants to establish with a cap percentage or a base salary relative to the cap, a percentage of it, I think could be very real, because Matt Thomas would be what would happen in negotiations is that topic would be brought up by Mark Rodgers, Russell Wilson's agent, and Matt Thomas would be like, hey, this is a team precedent. This is an NFL-wide precedent that, has never been established before. If we're even going to get into this territory, I got to have the next pay grade up in the room. This is not my pay grade type decision. So, it's going to get interesting. What are we, 3.5 hours away from it? So should be good.
Well, you touched on something there that I don't know that everyone has followed along closely with. So talk a little bit more about some of the specific demands that are rumored to be coming out of the Russell Wilson camp. Besides this deadline, you touched on one, which was a percentage of the salary cap. Talk about that, why that's a big deal, and there might be some others that have come up.
Yeah, so for the people who are less cap inclined, basically the way these big quarterback contracts have worked and other big, just even defensive players is let's take Russell Wilson's contract, for example. He signed it in, late 2015, I think it was. He signed for $21.8 million a year. At that time, he became the second highest paid quarterback based on new money average per year, just behind Aaron Rodgers, who was 21, 22.1, I think at the time. There's like a 0.3, 300K difference. Fast forward to today, Russell Wilson is like, I might be slightly off. It's either like 11, 12, or 13 in terms of highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. So my point being is that as the years go on, as more young quarterbacks are drafted and as more young quarterbacks are paid by their team, by their drafted team, these quarterback salaries begin to lag behind, especially with this cap growth. We're seeing what, 10, 12, 13, 14, $15 million a year in annual increases in the cap. So what Russell Wilson's camp is requesting is that Russell Wilson's base salaries be tied to a relative percentage of the cap. So of the overall cap. So say, the overall cap is 200 million, just for an even number. Russell could want, let's say, 20% of the team's cap. 2019 year, $200 million cap, that would be a $40 million base salary. Now, it wouldn't be, that finely cut down, but for, hypothetical purposes, think of it that way. He wants, as the cap to grow, he wants his base salaries to grow. He wants his income to grow. And to be quite honest with you, this is kind of my hot take. I don't think it's that unrealistic for Russell Wilson's caliber. Now, if we're talking Jameis Winston is asking for this deal, no, not going to happen. But this is Russell Wilson we're talking about, surefire Hall of Famer, top 5 quarterback in the NFL, franchise's greatest asset in history. I mean, it depends on the percentage. I've seen everything from 15 to 20% thrown out there. I think Russell Wilson's currently at like 12.1% of the Seahawks cap. So for 2019. So, if it's something like 15 or 16%, I'd have to do the math, but I think it'd be more reasonable than the high teens, like an 18, 19, 20. So yeah, should be.
Well, let's welcome in Jeff Simmons to the show. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm all right. Is the deadline 12 Pacific time or 12 Eastern time?
Well, dude, no one cares about the East Coast or Toronto show, man. We're here. It's definitely got to be West Coast related. They're all out here.
So I got to stay up till 3 a.m.
Hey, and I mean, what else do you have to do? Like, sleep's not going to help you out any.
No time for sleep.
And I'm hoping I'm going to ask if people can hear Jeff this time. Last time we could hear you on the show just fine, but on the pod it was super quiet. So,
It's weird. I got a good microphone here.
Well, that was bad. Whatever happened there. Evan, you talked for a second. We were talking, Jeff, about the percentage of cap request that's coming in. And Evan, you started to talk about he's 12% of the cap now. That's Russell Wilson. And then you went in and said 15 to 16 might be reasonable. If it's up to, I think, 18, you started saying that might not be. How are you kind of coming to those numbers?
Yeah, so let me actually clarify my numbers. I was a whole percentage point off, so that is embarrassing. It's actually 13.4% is what he's currently at. So he has a $25.2 million cap hit right now. I believe, and I should know this, the cap limit is like 182. Is that what it is for 2019? They pushed it out a couple weeks ago. I'm looking at it now. I believe it's 188. Okay, yes, it's 188.2 million is the 2019 cap hit. So let's just use an example. Let's say, so let's take this for an example. Say he wants 18%. Let me do the quick math. If I can do math. What would 18% be? It'd be like 30s, mid 30s. And I don't think that's that unreasonable considering the quarterback market. Aaron Rodgers is like $33 million a year.
Do you know the range of what percentage of cap quarterbacks are making? I think I saw this somewhere before. Maybe if you want to look that up for a second. So Jeff, while Evan's looking that up, do you have an issue with? Let's start with. Well, since we're on this topic, do you have an issue with the notion of assigning a player's contract value, to a percentage of the cap as the cap keeps moving around?
Do you mean in the context of Russell or just in general overall?
Let's talk specific to Russell, but you can talk about it if you feel differently about other types of players or positions. You can talk about that too.
Well, the thing I just find mind-boggling about this whole thing is just everything from the Seahawks standpoint seems to have to do with precedent, right? And their resistance to giving a percentage of the cap, I don't know if it's financial, I don't know, but everything just keeps coming back to precedent. I saw Andrew Brandt mention that today. He worked with John in Green Bay, and I just can't understand why precedent would apply to Russell, who's in such a unique scenario. Like, why does your franchise quarterback set precedent? I don't know if that's the exact answer you're looking for, but that's the part of this I just don't understand, and maybe you guys can help me out. But this seems like a unique situation, and players would understand that really precedent won't apply to your franchise quarterback that's won a Super Bowl. I'm just stumped on that, and that seems to be the big sticking point, and maybe that's why they're not committing to that extra guarantee. It's a very confusing thing to me.
So you're focusing on the precedent part. You didn't comment as much about the notion of how you feel about the concept in general, like of assigning a percentage of salary cap.
Well, I'd probably be resistant to it, just based on how it's unpredictable. It doesn't allow the team to model properly. You don't know what you're going to get. And I'd probably be resistant to it just from a philosophical standpoint. It doesn't seem a good way to build a team. I'd rather have a traditional quarterback. And the thing that's just so weird is all the word kept coming from Jay Keeps. Like, they didn't want to set the market. They just wanted fair value. You just want to slot in. When all of a sudden the reports come out this week, and it's now he wants a percentage of the cap, and he wants to be part of extra revenue streams, and he sees the gambling coming in. So from a philosophical standpoint, I think I am against it, even though I can see why he wants it. I can see where Mark Rodgers is coming from. I just don't think it's a good way from the Seahawks perspective how to build a team.
So Evan, what is
on the notion of the cap percentage? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get it from a player perspective. It's what I would be doing. I don't understand why anybody else would be asking for anything else, especially one factor we need to consider here is, sports gambling is likely to be legalized nationally. And once that happens, billions more are going to be injected. God knows in terms of how the NFL is going to structure that with live betting during games. I really see the cap absolutely exploding. We've seen $10, $15 million increases. We could see way bigger increases. We could see $30, $40 million increases year to year, if that becomes a reality. So from Russell Wilson's side of things, totally understand why he's doing it. From like a team projection, team side of things, it's a tough one. To me, it really depends on the percentage point. And I that's kind of a cop-out answer, but this is kind of a wide range. I think I saw Peter King suggest like 15 or 16% is what he thinks Russell Wilson's camp wants. If that's what it is, if it's truly 15 or 16%, I'm comfortable with that. But if we're talking 20%, Russell Wilson wants an additional 5 percentage points. That's a lot of cash. In a $200 million cap world, that's an extra $10, $15 million. Like, that's a lot of money.
Well, so, I'm looking on Spot Track right now, and they've got actually the percentage of cap for quarterback spend in the NFL. And the way it breaks down here, it's a little surprising to me. This includes all the players, so it's not just the starter, right?
Okay.
So like the Seahawks only have 2 quarterbacks on their cap for 2019, but the New Orleans Saints have 4 right now at the quarterback position, just to give you an idea. But in any event, says that, as you said, the Seahawks are spending 13.6% of the cap on the quarterback position, which ranks 8th in the NFL. Number one in the NFL is the Detroit Lions, who are spending 15.6% of the cap on quarterback. But number two is the New England Patriots at 15.53. And that's kind of interesting because we always talk about, everyone's like, why doesn't Russell take a Brady deal? And why doesn't he, take less money? It's a little surprising to see the Patriots up there at number two when Brady's supposedly getting like a lot less money than he's in the 18 million range or something like that. Do you have any idea like how they're coming to that?
Yeah. So the tricky part of talking about percentage of the cap is this is 100% relative to the structure of the contract. So if a player is, recently extended and has really high front-loaded money, like roster bonuses in year one, year two, a ton of upfront money, a very player-friendly, favorable deal, that's going to switch things up a little bit. So I wouldn't use it as our sole metric to analyze, the quarterback chart type of thing, but the answer is technical in terms of how the contract is structured and how the cash flow hits the player as they progress through their contract years.
The major point I'm seeing here, Jeff, is assuming for a second that these numbers are true, then you're talking about a Seahawks team that's currently spending 13.6% on the quarterback position, and the top of the NFL is spending 15.6%. So a 2% difference. There's 7 teams between the Seahawks and that top spot. We were only talking about, at the end of the day, you're talking about 15.6. And the teams, let's just go through them for a second. Number one in the NFL, Detroit Lions, 15.6. Number two, Patriots at 15.5. Number three, the Minnesota Vikings at 15.5. Number four, the Los Angeles Chargers at 14.5. Number five, the New Orleans Saints at 14.3. Number six, the Green Bay Packers at 14.2. And number seven, the Washington Redskins at 14.1.
Yeah.
One thing that stands out to me there, Jeff, is they're spending on cap money on the quarterback. And the argument has been made that you can't, if you spend this money on your quarterback, you're going basically to be really limited. What's your takeaway?
In terms of how the Seahawks should be building? Because really, my takeaway is that the Seahawks are in position to compete the next couple of years. And the idea that spending a lot of money on a quarterback doesn't limit you that the way people think. If you look at some of the good teams in the NFL, there's teams that spend little on quarterbacks like the Chiefs and the Rams, and then there's teams like the Saints that are in those percentage points spending a lot. The tricky thing with those numbers is the Seahawks are spending nothing on their backup, right? Is Paxton Lynch their only backup?
Right. Yeah, that's it.
And like Brian Hoyer, who's the Patriots backup, is probably making like $5 million a year. And that probably pushes that number up a little higher. So really, it's kind of a tricky number, but really the Seahawks, like if Russell jumps to that next level, I don't think it's going to really limit their growth because they have so much money coming off their cap.
But I haven't heard any other, group talking about percentage of spend on the quarterback position as opposed to percentage of spend on the specific starter. I think it's a worthwhile insight here, right? That's very possibly part of the Seahawks plan. They've been looking to potentially go cheap on the backup quarterback position. We've seen them, take rookies and undrafted free agents like Trayvon Boykin and all this kind of stuff. That might be part of their plan. And they might not be looking to have a viable, like costly backup. And at the end of the day, if that means you get to have Russell Wilson on your roster and you're not in a less competitive situation than some of the other top teams, then if we're really talking about, do you want Russell Wilson and a crappy backup or roll the dice on finding another franchise quarterback and a better backup? Is there anybody that's going to answer, take door number two? Like, of course not.
Maybe Pete Carroll.
Maybe. But I mean,
That was just for
let's take it for a second. Let's say that they do decide to go percentage of salary cap, and let's say that they do, cave to something like 15% as percentage of salary cap. The numbers here, basically what that would say is you need to make sure that you have basically spend no money on your backup for that position. These numbers don't show that you can't do that you can't manage it. So that makes some sense to me. I do think that the NFL already does have a percentage of cap contract. It's not like they've never done this before. It's part of the franchise tag. It's a positional, top 5 players at anything, and they've got some experience with this kind of thing. So to me, it's not necessarily a key sticking point. I just have some questions about what really does Russell want? Like, what does he ultimately want? And I do think there's some validity to the questions here about. There's a lot of people asking, is Russell's number one goal to win? Is Russell's number one goal to get the most possible financial benefit that he can? And if you can only pick one, I'm interested in hearing what you guys think. I don't think you can make an argument to say his absolute number one goal is to win as much as possible. There's just that can't be the case.
I have an answer for this. It is absolutely not. Number one goal is not winning. And this is not, I want to be clear, this is not a knock on Russell at all. If I was in his situation, I'd probably be doing the same thing of trying to get as many dollars as possible. But let's say, for theoretical purposes, if his number one goal was to win, he wouldn't be caring about his salary. He'd be asking for a $700K minimum veteran salary per year. If that's his number one goal, then he's putting everybody else in front of him, everybody else as a priority over him. And I don't think he should do that.
That's
and
extreme, though.
But if that's his number one goal, then that's what you have to do. But it's not, and it's fine. Like his number one goal is to make money and be successful, and then right under it, number 2 is win football games.
I think that's really simplifying things. This is not a choice between a veterans minimum deal and
totally.
And like he could easily say, I want percentage of cap and I want it to be 13%, just like I'm making, and he'd make plenty of money, and the team would be more likely to win.
But let's approach it through a different perspective. Then Russell and his camp, if their number one priority was winning football games, they wouldn't have approached this deadline this way. I don't think they would have arbitrarily set a deadline like this. Would they have? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is a high intensity situation where they're setting an arbitrary deadline, and Russell is saying, pay me this percentage of the cap by this date. You have no choice. I will not negotiate with you in a year, in 2 years, unless it's done tonight. Is that not priority number one financial gain, like over winning? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all.
I agree with. And Jeff, I think you know where I'm going with this, right? I think that there needs to be a little bit of taking the gloves off to just and acknowledge what the reality is with, Russell has a very spotless image, but I think people want to talk about, Tom Brady can afford to do it because his wife makes so much money. I just don't buy that for a second. Like, there's generational wealth when you get to a certain point, and then there's just silly money that, you really should just be giving away anyway. There's reasons that people that are mega rich, a lot of them consider doing like giving away 60, 70, 80% of the fortunes that they amass, because you can only spend so much and have such a rich life. Now, I don't mean that it sounds like a judgment thing, but I'm just pointing out that this is a value and integrity kind of decision here that you're saying as a player, I want to maximize, I want to get mine. I want to get mine more than I want to have a chance to make sure that we are as competitive as possible. Do you think that's the right read here, or do you think that that's too simple too?
Me or Evan?
You, Jeff.
I think that's the right read. I think another big portion of it is I think Russell's in a really unique situation in the sense that he is represented by a baseball agent. And it does seem like kind of changing the NFL landscape is a goal of theirs. And if it was just simply get next in line, take the next Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers conversation, it feels like this could have been done very quickly. So not only to build on what Evan said and what Brian said, they're trying to kind of change the structure. They saw what happened with Kirk Cousins, and Mark Rodgers has been around baseball where things are negotiated very differently and they hit free agency. I think that's as big of a goal as much as anything, whether it's winning or money. I think it's kind of resetting how players are valued, and especially in Seattle where he's had Tom Cable and the offensive line problems and the runnings this year, where he's coming at it where people do believe that he does want to, maybe he wants to play elsewhere. And there was that New York rumor a couple months ago. And so not only is he trying to get his value, I think they're trying to restructure how players are compensated in the NFL. And you saw Russell Okung today kind of show.
This isn't the first time he's done this. Let's remember that. Remember the first negotiations where it was, I want a fully guaranteed contract. Now, he didn't end up getting it. Kirk Cousins got it a couple years later, just recently. But I think there's a pattern here of them being extremely aggressive with setting new market precedents. And that's fine, but it's just going to make for really difficult, uncomfortable, tension-filled, negotiations. And it's going to suck for fans every single time.
Well, I mean, that's another layer to this. One would be I want to get paid a lot. I want to be the number one paid player in the league. Let's just say that's the demand. Then there's this demand of I want to not just set the market, but I want to change how contracts are getting built. I want to establish a new precedent in the league for how contracts are happening. You're going to the line, no patience for you, none. Like maybe take one or the other, or I think holding the team hostage in order to be able to say that you set the market in a new way and negotiated a new contract and broke new ground. I just find that to be. I find that to be selfish. I'll come out and say it. Like the only reason to do that is because you want to maximize the money you're going to get even more. And I don't see the need for it. I don't see the need for it. If the Seahawks are going to come out and pay you $35 million a year and you wouldn't sign that deal because you're too concerned in 3 or 4 years that the cap was going to go up and you were going to be the 8th highest paid quarterback or the 10th highest paid quarterback, like that's all vanity. That has nothing to do with actually anything that I personally value in terms of how these things go through. So I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say, people that are huge Russell Wilson fans, like, Mike Salk, Danny O'Neill, folks that have been defended him through thick and thin, that they have a problem with the way that Russell Wilson is handling this, that asking himself to be treated differently than other players, making some of these demands, dictating to the team how this is going to happen, that they understand why Russell Wilson's doing it, but they wish he wasn't doing it. They wish he was operating a different way. I'm curious for you guys. Jeff, we'll start with you. How do you feel about the way that Russell's handling and his camp's handling this negotiation?
I guess I'm not surprised. So maybe my feelings are a little different than those guys. Just coming back to what Evan just said, their negotiation just seems very similar to how Russell negotiated his contract the last time. And I don't know why. I was just expecting kind of a contentious negotiation. I think the way the season ended and the narrative that formed around Russell, I kind of just expected it to go like this. And maybe this deadline caught me off guard, but I was expecting the worst. I was expecting them to end up in the franchise route where it got ugly and things got really contentious. And the fact that it's happening kind of this way does not surprise me in the least. If it was new and kind of out of the blue, maybe I would be a little more upset, or maybe be a little, yes, selfish is a good word, but I guess just the way they've handled so many things, this is just consistent. So for me, I'm not as surprised at all, and I don't expect anything to get done. I'm expecting a really ugly thing where they're going to go with franchise routes, and maybe that gets done down the road, but I don't know. My expectations were set for this to happen, so I'm not at all surprised.
Evan, how about you? Jeff kind of danced around it a little bit. How do you feel about the way Russell Wilson's handling this negotiation?
Yeah, I think Mark Rodgers is a tough son of a bitch. I think he's a really, really strong negotiator. I think he's ruthless. I think he's aggressive. I think his background benefits him. I think his personality affirms, his professional goals. I think we need to kind of separate some of this. Yes, Russell Wilson wants his, and Russell Wilson wants to reset markets and, be paid the highest, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I think Mark Rodgers only amplifies this and encourages this in him to an untenable level. And I just think every time they engage in contract discussions, it is just going to be a high tension, ugly, PR-filled, leaking, battle up till the very last second. And to be quite honest, it's just a pain in the ass for fans every single time. I was talking about this with Will today, William Cornell. I firmly believe the last round of negotiations damaged his brand locally, at least temporarily. I thought a lot of people were upset with how Russell and his camp went about last negotiations. And honestly, I think people are starting to get upset with his camp right now again. I don't know if that's, the Seahawks front office winning the PR battle, leaking the right things at the right times. But I can see, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I think the general public opinion of Seahawks fans is going against Russell right now.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch. I would say that it's surprising to me a little bit, as I've heard people like the ones I mentioned, like Mike Salk and folks, come out against this approach a little bit. I'm kind of, I think, a little bit more like Jeff. It didn't bother me that much. Like,
I thought I was dancing around it.
Yeah, well, that's okay to say,
News. Mike Garofalo, with 3.5 hours to go until Russell Wilson's deadline to a deal with the Seahawks, is silent. Still work to be done to get an agreement. Could always happen quickly, but I'm not getting the sense the sides are finalizing a deal as I tweet. Gonna be a late night.
There's no way I'm sleeping now.
Yeah, so that basically no new news, no sign of progress.
But that was a little bit different of a tone, and maybe I'm overlooking too much into this. But Ian Rappert's tweet earlier pointed out that there may be some optimism towards this deal getting done. Now we have a little bit of a change of course towards a negative trend.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know how much Mike Garofalo is reading between the lines. It seems like there's a lot of that there, but he's been very reliable with Seahawks insights before, so he has pretty good sources in there. I think that's a pretty good indication that there's nothing happening right now that seems to indicate this is certainly going to happen tonight. But to me, it does not mean that a deal is not going to happen. And before we continue, I want to welcome in Nathan Ernst at NathanE11 on Twitter. Welcome back, my friend.
Hello. How's it going?
It's going well. We are on Russ watch, and having some
They're a
conversations
little.
about how we feel about the way Russell's handled this negotiation, or reportedly, because we don't really know all the details. And I was just saying, it doesn't really bother me that Russell's team set a deadline. It doesn't bother me that they're basically saying, if it's true, if they're saying either sign me now and extend me now, or I'm gone. I'm not going to sign an extension. If all those things are true, that doesn't really bother me. And maybe it's because I've just had a different perception of Russell all along. I've never felt like, he was Mr. Do Right that would just like be completely selfless and all these kinds of things. I think he's always wanted to be a great businessman and a great player. And I think he wants to be the best in everything he does. And so I don't really hold that against him. And I'd
Can
actually
we
go
pause
as
on that
far
for
as
a
to
minute?
say I'm happy that we have this deadline, because I want to get into this in just a little bit. If they don't come to an agreement, then I think maybe the Seahawks will finally be able to do something they haven't done in any of these other situations and wise up about what to do with a player that isn't going to sign with you. But let's talk about that in a second. Nathan, what's your reaction to how Russell's camp reportedly has been handling this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. I think that I've kind of thought all along that the team holds all of the leverage. Russell has the ultimate kind of trump card in that he can hold out, but that is, pretty much a nuclear option for him. In at least in the short term, with his relationship with the organization and fans and all that. So, and I think he's already come out and said that he won't do that. So, in a lot of ways with the tag and everything, I think the team is in the driver's seat here. And so it doesn't bother me at all that in what could possibly be Russell's last big contract, probably not, but he'll be 34, 35 when this one's done. And so, there's a good chance.
Looks like Nathan froze up there a little bit. So
I thought it was my computer.
yeah, I think that there's a real question here. Nathan, did we get you back?
Oh yeah, did I cut out?
You cut out there.
Oh,
you were saying that it could be Russell's last big contract.
yeah. And so I don't have a problem with him, kind of throwing everything at this and maybe leaking some stuff and putting these things out about wanting to go somewhere else. And maybe that's true, but maybe it's just him trying to get the team to kind of give in a little bit. And I certainly don't think this reflects poorly on Russell as a person. Russell's still the guy that goes to Children's Hospital, and Russell's still the guy that does all the stuff that he does. I mean, it is a business. Him trying to get paid, and whether you think the selfless thing would be to take a Brady contract, like it's professional sports. The thing that's bothered me about this the most, I think, is people. And I know everyone has like a range of opinions on Russell, and I have some opinions of Russell too, but as a person, but like this idea that he's suddenly not the person that people thought he was, that's weird to me. Like Russell's still a good dude. I mean, there aren't a lot of better guys in the NFL, even if he's a little fake, and even if he does post pictures when he goes to Children's Hospital. Like the dude's at Children's Hospital. Like, come on, like I think that this has gotten kind of not weirdly personal. That's probably to be expected, but I don't really knock him as a person for being less selfless in this case.
Yeah, I think what we're getting. I think you and I are both saying similar things, maybe a little bit differently, but that there are people that have had him on a pedestal that I feel like is maybe not realistic for most people to hit. And I don't think that it's really wrong for Russell to, if what he wants is he wants to make big money and that's his priority and he's going to do that, he has every right to do that, just like any of the rest of us have every right to do that. Does that conflict a little bit with some of the image that he tries to portray? I think it does. I absolutely do. And I think it's fair to call him on that and say whatever. For me, that's the difference between how he's behaving or reportedly behaving in this negotiation and my perception of what I expected from him is very similar. So like, to me, there's not much of a dissonance going on here. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's doing kind of what I expected. I would be really surprised if Russell Wilson took a team-friendly deal and limited his earnings in order to help the team be more competitive. That would be really surprising to me.
Because he's never said he would do that, right?
Right. That's why it would be really surprising to me. And I think that, I don't think that's a reasonable thing to expect from everything we've heard from Russell. I think it's a reasonable thing to ask about and a reasonable thing to like posit, but I don't see much evidence about why we would expect Russell to do something like that. At least not now.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you looked at his charitable works and his, Bible verse of the day and that kind of stuff, and you tried to draw, connect some lines or connect some dots about what he would do for the team in this situation, I don't know that makes a lot of sense. Like, I think that if you thought he was going to take less money because he, goes to Children's Hospital, that's the like that to me. I think the disconnect was on your part, not on Russell's part. Russell's never said I'm going to take less money so the team can win more. I mean, he's spouted out all the cliches and all that, but like he's never seriously talked about. I mean, he's been really open about wanting to own a team someday and wanting to kind of be a mogul. I think he's been much more open about that than he has said anything about wanting to help the team out and give him a hometown discount or anything like that.
So I'm going to use a host rights here because I'm kind of not that interested, to be honest, in what this says about Russell. I think that's like the least interesting part of this story, even though I ask questions about it because I know a lot of people are curious. Let's turn it a little bit to the notion of, let's say that the deal doesn't get done, which before I even do that, percentage chance, 8:47 p.m. Pacific time, percentage chance from each of you that a deal will get done with Russell Wilson by midnight tonight. And we'll start with you, Evan.
Right now, 40%.
Jeff.
10.
Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm close to 0. I'll say 10 to be generous, but yeah.
I'm like 30, 35%. I'm somewhere around there. So I think all of us, if I do my math right, or say it's less than a 50-50 chance it's going to get done. So the more likely scenario is that it doesn't get done. Then let's start with you,
Sure.
Evan. Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, sorry. I think I'm cutting out really bad. What is the incentive that Seattle has to do this deal by midnight tonight? Like maybe Russell just takes whatever they've offered and then it gets done. But what pressure should John Schneider be feeling right now?
Oh, I mean, I think the best case to be made there is if you believe that you can take Russell and his camp at their word that they will not take any extension after today, not just for this year, but they will not sign an extension with Seattle if they can't get to an agreement today. If that's the case and you believe him and take him for his word, then that's the motivation. If you believe that you want to have Russell Wilson on your team, that's what you'd have to do.
But they have a tag. And do we really think that if in 6 months Seattle panics and caves and just says, yeah, that deal that you wanted and asked for, we're going to give it to you, is Russell going to suddenly just say, no, you're going to tag me for 2 or 3 years and I'm going to give up that kind of long-term security? Is really, is that compelling if you're John Schneider?
I don't see Seattle doing that though. That would be very counter behavioral for them. Don't you think?
Doing what? The tagging or the caving or
like caving in last second? Like this just does not seem like for a team that's so rigid and cares so much about precedent and not guaranteeing a base salary beyond year one, and new extensions. It just doesn't seem like something they would do.
But guys, you're kind of getting into this next place I want to go, which is good. But let's assume for a second the deal doesn't get done tonight. Most of us, all of us, think it's less than 50-50 shot that it's going to happen. If that's the case, then what's the right play? And let's add into the equation here in this scenario. Deal does not get done tonight, and you believe that Russell will not sign an extension with the team. Okay, so let's assume both things are true.
Slight update from Pro Football Talk. If Russell Wilson deal gets done tonight, one source predicts it will be huge numbers with a conventional structure, but nothing outside the box like future compensation tied to cap percentage. Whatever you want to take that as.
Well, the interesting thing there is, I mean, Jake Heaps today has said that that he is not hearing that Russell Wilson's camp is trying to break new ground on contracts stipulations, for what that's worth. But yeah, so scenario, deal does not get done, and you believe that Russell Wilson will not sign an extension. What is the right way to handle that situation for the Seahawks? I'm going to start. You guys can adjust from here. I think that the way to handle that, if you believe he's not going to re-sign, I think his trade value is only going to decrease from here on out. I think that you should be looking to trade as soon as possible and get the maximum amount of value you can. And I'll stop there. Like, if those two things are true, I think the only right answer is to trade him as soon as possible.
Tomorrow morning.
If possible.
Tomorrow morning.
Sure.
Yeah, extend by midnight or trade tomorrow. That's the bottom line.
Are you agreeing or are you
100% agree. He is 30 years old. He is only getting older every single motherfucking day. He is on a current fairly affordable well, not fairly affordable, but I mean, it's like 12th highest. He's like, so he's under contract through 2019 at like $27 million a year, whatever the heck it is. I think he has oh wait, hold up. I'm a dum-dum. It would be even less because the trading team that would receive Russell Wilson, hold up, this is important actually. The team that received Russell Wilson in a trade would only take on a 2019 cap hit of $17 million. That's fairly reasonable.
Okay. So you are on team trade him as soon as possible if they can't sign him tonight and you believe he's not going to sign an extension.
Team trade his ass at 6 a.m.
Jeff.
I was initially on the ride it out, see what happens train because I believe, like as Nathan just said, they have 3 years of club control essentially, right? And in 3 years, are Pete and John even going to be here? That's the question to me. And I would just keep writing it out and keep seeing what happens. But I think in our group chat the other day, Nathan brought up a really good point. And I think the point was if you're going to blow it up and not keep Russell, the time to trade him is now, because if you trade him, you're going to want to have that high pick next year. So if you can get like a boatload of picks now, set up to get a quarterback next year, kind of tank this year, while you already have 11 picks for next year, and add those picks now, that kind of sets up an interesting rebuild. It's not a great scenario, but if you figure the 11 picks they have this year, they can go 0-16 with Paxton Lynch or something, get a quarterback next year and have like 100 picks. That's a pretty quick way to turn this thing around, kind of better than whatever they're doing now, which I'm really not sure what they're doing.
Where are you at in this, Nathan?
Yeah, I think there's a compelling argument that Seattle, if they honestly believe that like this Russ thing is untenable and it's just not going to work, that they should tank. They should trade him. Especially if like, can you get the number 1 pick from Arizona? I mean, and you can get Kyler Murray, then you're not even really tanking. Maybe you can look at a pretty quick turnaround. But doing a little bit of a teardown, and you've got a bunch of picks next year that would be lower, and then trying to find that quarterback. They're not going to do that. Like, I think there's no chance that Pete will sign off on that. And so if I put myself in Pete's shoes and I'm only going to be coaching for a few years, and I don't want the last couple of years that I'm coaching to be a rebuild, and I don't think Pete rebuild, he wouldn't rebuild. I don't think Pete thought when he got here he was doing a rebuild. Letting this play out a little bit, tagging him for a year or two, taking some shots on some mid-round quarterbacks, and then trading him a couple years down the road when you've had a little bit more time. Like the backup quarterback right now is Paxton Lynch. They have no plan, right? Like the best case scenario for a quarterback in the draft is probably Will Grier, and that's pretty shaky. So I would probably play it out a little bit just to buy yourself the time to be properly prepared for when you do move on from him.
So playing that back, you would keep him for 1 to 2 years on the franchise tag and then look to trade him?
Yeah. Like, you could then feel like you need Will Grier around earlier, wherever Will Grier ends up going, right? And then maybe Will Grier works out, and then you just trade him, you tag him and trade him next year. Or maybe you tag him and then you get another draft and you find whoever, or, give yourself a year or two. If you're Pete Carroll and you want to keep competing, I think giving yourself a little bit of a buffer time here is probably the right way to go. And I think while tanking is probably the objectively right answer, I don't think that's a bad plan necessarily.
So our chat makes me laugh sometimes. I will say that if all of us are coming to the conclusion that the Seahawks should trade Russell if he's not going to sign that deal, and the only question is about when. The next question I'd have for you guys is, do we believe that the Seahawks would actually trade him? And I'm going to go out there and say, I don't think they would. Like, what evidence do we have that shows the Seahawks, this front office, are willing to trade away a top-performing player, especially a position like quarterback, and get value back? Earl Thomas, no. They blew that completely. Richard Sherman, no. Michael Bennett, they did, but they traded him for pennies on the dollar, when they were really just trying to get rid of him, clearly. Like, show me the evidence that there's a situation where the Seahawks would trade Russell Wilson. Do you guys see any, besides logic, do you see anything in the Seahawks history that leads you to believe they actually would trade him, whether it's tomorrow or 2 years from now?
Yeah, maybe 2 years from now if they had a quarterback that they could. So, like, say they drafted Mahomes a couple years ago. Say he slips to 25. I believe Russell would have been traded by now. But given their situation where their only option is Paxton Lynch, and they only have 4 picks, and it's not a quarterback-rich draft, I don't see any scenario they trade him. But in 2 years, if that Will Grier scenario, for example, came about, or they got a quarterback somewhere else, that is a scenario where I could see them trading him. But right now, I put the chances under 1%.
I have a hard time buying into that.
Say why?
Because the tag is so expensive in terms of, I think people forget, like, when we're talking the tag, we're talking a 1 year cap hit of like 33, 36, $54 million. Like, this is not spread out stuff. If the Seahawks aren't willing to pay him 33.5, 34, with a maybe more team-friendly contract structure than fully up front in 1 year, fully guaranteed money, I have a real hard time seeing them let him play out the tag. I would think they would move to trade him as soon as possible, especially if, they got competitive offers. Guys, Our head coach, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, said that they could roll with T-Jacks and their offense would be okay. Like, who posted that screenshot today? Was it Brian? Nathan? I forget who it was. Ben Baldwin. Like, this is Pete Carroll we're talking about. You like this is Pete Carroll. There's no way they don't accept a high value trade and go draft like a couple running backs in the first round.
I think that comment was a little concerning, but I do think, in fairness to Pete, he was talking about having a complete team and wanting a deep, complete team more than trying to crap on the QB position. But it does give you a little insight. And I do wonder if, because Pete's got, I think, a lot more fuck you in him than he lets on. And I wonder if he wouldn't do it just to be like, no, it's me, and we are going to win with the, like, he's a stubborn dude. He's a prideful dude. I don't think that this is like Pete's own like thought process about this, but I guarantee you there's a part of Pete that like just wants to trade Russ and go with some T-Jack type quarterback and build this, balanced offense that he loves and to just prove everybody wrong. There is a part of Pete that wants to do that. And that might be if they feel like the situation with Russ becomes untenable. And I think that's really the question. Do we really think that Russ would never sign an extension if they don't get it done tonight? I don't believe that. But if they really believe that, then I could see that part of Pete being like, let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's get him out of here, and let's run the hell out of the ball and be balanced and have a deep, complete team and prove that it's not a QB league.
But then there's John Schneider.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the thing.
John loves Russell, and Jim Nagy was. I know he used to work for John. He was saying like he can't see John trading him in any scenario. And that's where their relationship would be very, very interesting between John and Pete. Because I believe that John thinks Russell's probably the best player in the NFL.
I mean, that's kind of the thing. We've complained about the situations with Bennett and Sherm and Earl and how they've kind of let these relationships deteriorate. This one, it's not just about Russ and the team. Like, it seems like there's a little bit of like Russ is kind of a little bit of a proxy with John and Pete, and how much of that is really there. And like we all said, we think the right thing to do is to probably trade Russ if the situation is that bad. And I think that Schneider would understand that, no matter how much he does like Russell. So maybe it doesn't really come to that, but that's an interesting part of this, where it's not just a relationship between Russ and the team. There's some inner team dynamics here too.
Well, we've got a new tweet from Albert Breer weighing in, and he says there are two ways to protect against a changing landscape: new CBA, new media deals, legalized gambling, and how that would impact your contract if you're Russell Wilson. Number one, tying compensation to percentage of the cap, and number two, a shorter term deal. If it's not going to be number one, maybe it's number two. I think we can all agree this feels like a number two.
Dad joke. God damn it. That's what you come for, folks. The poop jokes.
Well, so yeah, it's interesting. He's so certain about it. What would be the logic of the Seahawks signing Russell? What would it be, to a 3-year deal maybe, instead of having him for one more year?
I don't even know what the incentive is for Seattle's side. If it's going to be 3 years, is it going to be like, what's the trade-off for Seattle? Because that extra year of, contract length is vital for team structuring and, cap outlook purposes. There would have to be some offset, something for to incentivize Seattle, I think, to agree to that.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, the upside for Seattle obviously is you get some certainty about Russell for the next 3 years, and you can move on to working through the rest of your cap and roster. and do a little bit more planning, you can start thinking more seriously about what Frank Clark and those other numbers need to be. So, I mean, it's not totally outlandish. I just I don't think the Seahawks want to be in the business of renegotiating quarterback deals every 3 years.
They'd also get the ability to kind of massage the numbers a little bit and redistribute some stuff with next year, kind of restructuring that year and all that. I think that, like you said earlier, Evan, like these 1 year franchise tag cap hits are very rigid, and so they could get a little wiggle room that way.
He could also get that fully guaranteed contract potentially if it's a 3-year deal, maybe like a Kirk Cousins style thing.
Yeah, it's so weird that I think we talked about this last time. I just don't get why anybody would make, if you're a quarterback, specifically if you're a quarterback, why you would make fully guaranteed contract your sticking point. Like, you're gonna get paid. Russell's bet on yourself. Like, get a higher average per year. You're gonna end up with more money. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me why he would go for that. But who knows? I guess one of the other pieces we should talk about, we'll kind of come back to the Russell thing here in a second, but Frank Clark's another aspect that's come up recently. And we've talked about on this show before that there's been some rumors and there's some logic in trading Frank. I think if I remember right, last time we were on, I was at least open to entertaining it. I can't remember where Jeff and Evan fell, but I think Nathan, you were pretty dead set against it. I think your point was why trade? Like, you finally find a player that's top of his positional value, and he's young. Why wouldn't you trade him? Or why wouldn't you sign him? I mean, that's what your money's for. I think in talking with you off the show, your point of view has changed a little bit on that. Can you, unless it's changed again, can you kind of share your thought process on Frank Clark and what you would do with him?
Yeah, no, I've flipped on this. I'm good with trading Clark. I still think that you want. I mean, he's a very good player. You want him on the team, but it does need to be at the right price. And when you look at what some of the guys went this year, the two Smiths, and then the Rams. What's the guy who the Rams signs this year that they traded for? Fowler. Clark is not so much better than those guys that he should be getting paid, $3, $4, $5 million a year more. And so if he's really demanding something 20 plus million, then I do think that they need to trade him. It's not worth it. There's a few reasons for that. In terms of his pressure rates, which are pretty predictive of sacks. Sacks are pretty volatile. If you want to really get a good idea of how good a pass rusher is, you should look at the pressures, and that'll give you a good idea about what you can expect for sacks in the coming years. Clark's pressure rates are good, but they're in that tier of player that I just talked about. They're not in
Did we lose him?
Yeah, it's like the Toronto internet connection has skipped over to Nathan's tonight.
Crazy stuff happens on this Russell Wilson deadline.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, you froze again, dude.
Ah.
Yeah.
All right.
You're going from crystal clarity to like completely frozen. So
we caught you off at, you said that he was in the good category.
Yeah. All right. I think that's pretty much it. Is that what I've really come to feel like is that he's not as great as I thought he was. He is very good, but he's not back up a truck of money, whatever he wants good.
Yeah, that's kind of been my view on him as well. I think he's a really good pass rusher. And I think the other risk there is with Frank Clark is this is a guy that has been very, very consistently about the money. And he's been about the money for other players. He's been out even every interview I've heard, not every, but a lot of interviews I've heard with him. he's been focused on what he needs to do to get that contract. And I totally get it, and I don't fault him for it. But when you have a player like that, you do have to wonder if his motivation is so tied up with the money, how will that impact his play after he gets paid? And that could come in the form of, his on-the-field performance isn't quite the same. It could come in the form of he's played through a lot of injuries the past few years. Maybe he doesn't play through those injuries as much if he's got the money sitting in his bank account. So I do think there's some risk there. I don't think it's enough to where I would beg off of Frank, but the challenging part here, we talked about this a lot in our chat, Evan and Jeff, but like you're talking about paying Frank Clark probably $20 million a year, or you're talking about $20 million in cap space that you can spend other places and whatever draft compensation you can get in exchange for a trade. And I think D Ford was what, a second round pick?
Yeah.
You'd have to assume that the compensation would be similar to that, right?
It was interesting because I was like Nathan. At first, I was very against the idea of trading Frank. I just thought that this team, we talked all year about how this team has no blue chip players on defense. He's really developed into like a nice player in the room and a guy that really developed like into a leader. And it's one of the worst parts about a salary cap in football is like you got to keep getting rid of these guys every couple of years when they really start to ascend. But we've talked about this so much that with Russell's contract and Frank's contract, and we've talked about trading Bobby. That's another option. But if you're looking at how this team, because this team's kind of in no man's land right now. They're like built to win 9 or 10 games. They have all these huge contracts coming up. Kind of the way you can kind of move this thing forward, I think Frank is one of the few chips that you have, unless you're trading Russell. And when I saw that Mike Florio report come out on Sunday, like that, there was trade chatter brewing and he might get dealt, I kind of got excited about it. And I started looking at how they can fix their draft this year. I know we haven't even talked about the draft. If it wasn't for this deadline, that's probably all we'd be talking about. But if you can spend that money and use those picks, all of a sudden this team becomes a lot more interesting heading into the draft. And you become a lot more flexible in terms of paying Bobby or paying Russell. And just having these three guys and having to pay all three just doesn't seem like a sound strategy in any way. So if you're not trading Russell, Frank has to be the guy to trade, no? Because Bobby's not going to bring you back much.
And God, if they do trade Frank, again, quote, botch this already. Like was waiting until after they couldn't sign him to an extension before tagging him the right time to do that trade versus waiting until after. Is his trade value, has it declined at all? And what are the Seahawks going to do if are they going to end up paying him the franchise tag salary and not get to sign him to an extension this year and then have him walk next year? Are they going to be in a situation where they have to use a franchise tag on Russell next year, and people are going to know that he's going to be available next year one way or another without having to give up any compensation?
That's the worst case scenario.
But that's the strategic stuff that I'm like, come on, like these guys are paid to think about this stuff. I think about it like barely at all. And I'm not saying I'm a genius here, but like that seems very obvious to me. If you think that there's an eventuality where you're going to have to trade Frank Clark, you do it before the league understands that you're struggling to deal with your contract situation. Now, if they were to sign Russell Wilson, then you could argue that would be the best time. That would now become the new best time to trade Frank Clark, because now the league would not be certain that they're going to be able to get Frank Clark without compensation next year. Right?
That's probably what they're waiting for. They've known about this deadline since January, right?
Apparently, yeah. We didn't talk about that earlier, but people are saying, because Bob Condotta just reported this, I think like last week or pretty recently about this April 15th deadline, that it's somehow new, but it's supposedly been around for quite a while. So the Seahawks have supposedly known about this since the offseason started.
Also, Bob might be losing his mind on Twitter right now. You guys following him?
Yeah, he is.
I think this deadline's driving him nuts.
He's a little, yeah. I think he's trying to get himself away.
He's gotten loopy.
Bob lives.
Did you guys see the Joel Corey tweet today?
No.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Did you guys not see it? It was like a Bob Condotta moment where somebody would like question him, and Joel, who's like typically super stoic, out of nowhere just tweets like, "I don't give a fuck what you think," or something completely like. It was something so out of character. It was like the Pope tweeting like a, I don't know, like a Pornhub link or something. It was so wild.
I do. There's a kind of a funny mention in the chat from Alana or Alana, who says the next QB better be tall. And wouldn't it be funny and like totally Pete, like if they went from having the shortest quarterback to having the tallest in Paxton Lynch, and you know, they had to answer all the questions about why a tall quarterback couldn't succeed. I mean, there's something poetic about that for sure. So yeah, I mean, look, we talked about a situation before where a scenario where Russell Wilson doesn't sign the deal and the team doesn't believe he's going to sign the extension. Let's go the other way. Let's say that Russell does sign. Are you guys saying in that scenario that, let's go with you, start with Evan. Are you team trade Frank? Team sign Frank? Where are you at on that?
I, much like Nathan and Jeff's slow progression over time, I was initially pretty positive on on signing Frank, extending him, but I think Nathan hit the nail on the head. Frank Clark is a $15 million player wanting to be paid like a $22 million player. I think he wants that DeMarcus Lawrence deal as a baseline. So minimum, we're talking $21 million a year. And I think Nathan, again, is right. If you look at those pressure rates, they're not, they're upper half of the, he's good, like top 15, top 20, but he's not a Von Miller. He's not, a Khalil Mack. If he was one of those players, I'd say, sure, he's a game changer. He's one of the best defensive players in the NFL. I cannot unequivocally say Frank Clark is one of the best defensive players in the NFL. And I need to be able to say that if we're going to pay him $22 million a year. Now, this may sound crazy. I'd rather pay Bobby Wagner $22 million a year than Frank Clark. And I know that's not, the linebacker market, but I think even Bobby's a better value at $22 million. I just don't think, like I said, I think Frank Clark is a $15 million player wanting to be paid like a $22 million player. And I think it's real funny, honestly, almost comical that the whole Pro Football Talk tweet and all the rumors that came out Sunday night saying that Frank Clark's camp was like super frustrated that they weren't getting any traction with the Seahawks. And I think that only goes to show that they're probably worlds apart. The Seahawks are probably in the 15, 16, $17 million range, and they're probably not budging. And that's why they're maybe willing to use the tag on him. And yeah, it's just an interesting shit show that's kind of fallen behind the scenes, under the whole Russell Wilson drama.
That's just like the last 5 years of this team. It's a fascinating shit show.
It is.
It's really a shit show, though. I mean, they missed the playoffs once.
It's a shit show because Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, Frank Clark, potentially Bobby Wagner, and potentially Russell Wilson are all about to leave in the last 2 to 3 years.
No doubt that there's been you guys have heard me on this show rag on them about a lot of that. I just did it a few minutes ago. I think it's a little bit sensationalistic to say it's been a shit show because the on-field results have not. There's a lot of teams that would kill that to have the results that they've had the past few years.
But a lot of that is foundation that has been set here for a little while, right? You've got Pete, you've got John, you've got Russ, right? And so I don't know that they've been coasting on that. Like, obviously, they've done good stuff in adding Lockett and Clark and Carson and different guys. But I don't know that this has been one of the best run teams the last 4 or 5 years. They're not terrible. So yeah, maybe shit show is a little unfair, but I mean there have been a lot of really kind of tasty storylines from this team the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the reason I'm saying that is you could go through and look at, well, take the Patriots for example. There's a lot of guys that have exited, name players, people that they know. There've been guys that have been injured at various points, whether it's Edelman or Gronk, and they've kept ticking along and doing their thing in a much, much, much easier division than the Seahawks have been in. So there is something to be said for the system being able to sustain when you're losing a lot of that talent that the Seahawks have lost. I think if the answer becomes really different if you're talking about, is this team on a trajectory to win another Super Bowl? No. I think they turned the corner a little bit from the previous season to this last season, where I think the arrow is pointing up now, where it was pretty clearly pointing down for a couple of years. So that's encouraging, but yeah, I don't know. I kind of got sidetracked on the shit show comment, but go ahead.
Well, Danny Kelly always said calls them a circus. I think that might be a better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he thrives in chaos or likes chaos. He seems to be surround himself with chaos.
Jake Heaps, by the way, just to keep you guys up to date, he's just and this is what I heard from Jake earlier today. He says he wants to double down on this. He's referring to the Pro Football Talk tweet about not breaking a unconventional structure. He says, "I'm not breaking new info here. I've been saying this from the beginning. Just want to focus the conversation. This isn't about tying percentage to the salary cap. The sticking point is and has always been about guarantees." He's got 3 fingers crossed. So I think Jake is particularly well situated to know what's going on. He works with Russell. He works for Russell's company, and I know that they're pretty tight. So
he's Russ's spokesman. He's a PR rep for Russ. Let's not pretend here. He's clearly passing on information directly from Russell and his agent.
I think that's likely.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then geez Louise. I'll flip on this one. Russ a little bit in terms of, I don't believe he needs to be the break new ground on the contract. I think that's really vanity and not really meaningful. But if the team is really gonna hold the line on guarantees, who the hell cares? The same way I said, if I'm Russell, I wouldn't make that the sticking point. I'd make it about how much the total contract value is, because you're probably going to get it all anyway. If the team is sticking on this, come on, that's ridiculous. You're probably going to pay it all to him no matter what. So if you can agree on the number and it's just about guarantees, that would be ridiculous.
Well, and like you said earlier, what is the history of this team moving on from players like this? They've never done this.
Right.
So why are they worried about it?
It's a stupid president thing.
I don't get it.
If Russell Wilson tears his ACL in year 4 or year 3 of his extension, and that money is injury protected, and he's still going to make $35 million that year, you're kind of fucked either way. So it's why not just give him the $35 million for the year? You're not going to win a Super Bowl without him. You're going to win a Super Bowl with fucking Paxton Lynch back there? No, you're not. So just throw the $35 million at him anyway. The guarantee is just weird to me.
I think Nathan was going to say something interesting.
He was going to be
damn it, we lost him again.
And you're so right, Evan, about every take you have.
Well,
I think that's what broke his computer.
I get some really fantastic frozen faces of you guys when it cuts out like this. It's pretty great.
I'm glad.
Okay, you're gonna respond to me, Nathan.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, and if he does tear his ACL in year 3 of a 4 or 5 year deal, are they just like, oh, we're done? Nope, can't start him anymore. Like, no, they're gonna roll him out there in year 4 because unless he just completely bombs between now and then he's gonna be their starter.
Yeah, I got. I mean, I've been pretty consistent on this. I'm curious if you guys are any different. I mean, I think I am on the team of keep Pete around, sign Russell, and keep rolling. I don't think that that's necessarily the best. I don't believe that's necessarily the highest percentage plan to win another Super Bowl. I'm not sure of that. Like, I think that there is a case to be made that if your goal is to win another Super Bowl, you might be better off breaking down the roster more and rebuilding. I think that the odds are lower overall of you hitting that goal, but you might have a greater percentage chance, I guess, overall. So, but even with that in mind, I don't see how you try to break this up. Russell and Pete and this group have been playing well. I give them the money. You keep playing, you keep winning. I don't think this team can really be a losing team if they've got Russell and they've got Pete coaching the defense. I think that they're in good shape to be a good team. So in the end, it'll probably seem like this is a lot about nothing when Russell does sign a deal and stays with the Seahawks, and we'll go from there. I think the bigger question is, how do you potentially build a championship roster around whatever Russell Wilson's going to command in terms of top dollar at the quarterback position? That's the question. I don't think we have a great answer for yet. I think you have to get pretty fortunate in the draft in order for that to be the case.
That's the answer.
And you're going to have to be aggressive on stuff. Sorry, I don't know if I'm cutting out again, but you have to be aggressive on stuff like the Frank Clark situation, the Bobby Wagner situation. You have to get ahead of situations like Earl and Sherman, and all these things all these opportunities that have they've let slide a year and then let guys walk for little or nothing. They have to get in front of that to help make sure that they have lots of opportunities in the draft so they can hit it well.
And that's what happened with the Saints, right? They were kind of meddling around 7 and 9 for all those years with Breeze. They had that one good draft with Kamara and Ramchick and Lattimore, and there's a couple other guys in there. And all of a sudden, they went from 7 and 9 to Super Bowl contender. And those are the kind of drafts that Seattle badly needs to hit now.
Let's. I want to clarify this conversation. The Seahawks have not made the Super Bowl recently because of Russell Wilson's high salaries. They have not made the Super Bowl recently because they haven't been nailing drafts. And I'm not saying you weren't saying that, Jeff. I see this conversation on Twitter all the time of saying like, hey, if you're going to be paying Russell an extra $10, $15 million a year, you're not going to win a Super Bowl with that. Completely disagree. Mm-hmm. You can pay Russell Wilson $35 million a year. What it means, though, is if you're going to win a Super Bowl with a highly paid quarterback, you just need to draft that much better. It's that much harder. And I'm not saying it's easy, but it means to reach that Super Bowl, to reach that objective, that's what you have to do. That's what you have to be really good at. That's why you have to be super aggressive when it comes to acquiring comp picks and trading players before, they're about to leave as veterans, like the Sherman Earl, situation. It's like, you have to be more aggressive about this when you're paying a highly paid quarterback. So if they're going to get back to the Super Bowl, I want to see them be more aggressive on the opposite side of trades. I don't want them trading for big star players. I want them offloading big star players a year before. They got to be more aggressive and creative.
And I mean, wouldn't you say that the draft they had in this past year is a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I think there's some picks that are really, really encouraging. I think the player who doesn't get enough love, honestly, is Trey Flowers. He was good year one for a 5th round, 6th round, whatever the heck he was. He's somebody I think that could maybe even potentially better than Shaq Griffin right now. So and then they picked a stud running back in the first round, so super excited about that one. Will Dissly, everybody's worried about the tight end position. I'm fucking psyched, stoked. I mixed the words, but I think their drafts haven't been that bad recently. They just need to do a better job. They're gonna make the Super Bowl.
I think it was a step in the right direction, but there's no star power, and they need star power in these drafts. You heard the Saints one I mentioned before. They got Ramchick, they got Kamara, they got Lattimore, and they got someone else in there. When Seahawks, great, they got contributors. They got a lot of depth last year. They really needed that depth when they lost a lot of veteran players. But they need to use those high picks better. They need to stop being so cute in the draft, and they need that star power because they need to get those blue chip players out of these cheap laborers, and they wasted that Malik McDowell year and Penny, Posick, Rasheem Green. They need stars as much as they need depth and UDFAs and good players. That's what they need more than anything.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about blue chippers, the blue chip players they've got in the draft since 2012, I would say, are Frank Clark and Tyler Lockett.
Mm-hmm.
No Michael Dixon love?
Carson, maybe. Maybe not blue chip, but he's right there.
Yeah, he's close. I mean, I think for me, blue chip is game changing, like best at his position in the league or close to it, all pro level type player. Lockett and Clark haven't even, I don't think Lockett's got there as a returner, but as a receiver, I don't think he's been an all pro. And although last year you could make the argument he deserved to be, a lot of his numbers were off the charts, but yeah, I don't know that Carson, as much as I love him, is a transformative running back.
It's definitely fresh.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Seahawks are at a crossroads. We started the show with this tonight. Like, either they're going to have Russell and they're going to have to build around him, and if they do that, they're going to have to nail the draft. They're going to have to be aggressive in how they manage their roster and their cap, or they're going to be sans Russell, or potentially like needing to look at offloading him. And in that kind of scenario, you're going to be talking about, I don't know. I think the most likely would be that they'd probably at least keep Russell through the end of this year, knowing that they could tag him next year, and draft a quarterback, or even sign a veteran free agent. There's a lot of veteran free agent quarterbacks that are going to be available. So I don't know. We have not covered yet on this topic. I mean, I guess one is, Evan, you had talked about burning your jersey, John Schneider jersey, if they don't sign. At what time are you planning to do this?
I was thinking about doing it towards the end of the podcast, but now I am thinking about giving him till midnight to get it done. I don't know which is more fair.
I think you got to keep your perfect record of not doing what you say you're going to do.
I'm going to give you a pass on that too. Jersey burning. I don't know, man.
No, I'm that guy. Let's be very clear here.
Don't be that guy though. We don't need to burn jerseys.
I think it's going to be really.
This is the thing, though. It's like
it catches the apartment on fire.
I have the rubbing alcohol. I have the jersey. I have a barbecue outside. I'm ready for this. I'm prepared.
But you are going to lose your mind and want to praise him the second they use their first draft pick, like halfway through the second round. You're going to
wait. What do you mean?
I think
you're going to regret burning his jersey.
I don't know if you've noticed this about yourself, Evan, but sometimes you have some swings of emotion. And while you may be at a low right now, I think it might swing back upwards for you later on.
I don't think so. I am known as the eternal pessimist of Seahawks Twitter, as you know now. Yeah, maybe. I'm debating it. I don't know if I can stay up till midnight, to be quite honest with you. I might fall asleep.
That's a while. I do want to take this moment to there's we've got a lot of loyal listeners, and we've got a lot of folks that have strong opinions about each of us on this show. I've heard it various times. Folks even asking me why I'm on the show, and they've had questions about each one of us. Jeff is the most soft-spoken, so maybe he gets the least amount of hate tweets and hate chat moments. But I do want to call out, like, it is very intentional. We've assembled this group of people that we genuinely enjoy each other's company and enjoy talking to each other about this stuff, and we don't see things the same way. Like, we've talked about this on our own a lot. There's going to be no shortage of places you can go around Twitter, and Seahawks Twitter especially, where people are going to stand on a soapbox, act like they know everything, that anyone that disagrees with them is an idiot, that, they're king of the hill or queen of the hill. And they don't. They just don't. Like, none of us do. There's way more about this game that all of us do not know than that we do. And I just want people to understand that are listening that we are wanting to create a cross section of people with different personalities, different points of view, different levels of expertise about different things. They're going to come here and have fun trying to have these conversations about a game that we love, but that's just a bleeping game at the end of the day. So, I'm not defending anyone in particular, including myself, but I do want folks to know that's a goal here for us. Like, besides just having fun talking about the game, I will tell you, there's things that Nathan says that drive me crazy. There are things that Evan says that drive me crazy. Not as many things that Jeff says, but there are some.
All right, I'll start.
Yeah. He's too Canadian. I mean, what do you want? But John
Schneider's an idiot.
Hey, go fuck yourself, Jeff.
You're talking about burning his jersey. You can't defend him. This is why you can't burn the jersey. You reflexively told him to go fuck himself when
I have a deep love for him. For him, Nathan. But right now he's hurting me. Right now, I just walked in. Alex, I hope you're not listening, but John Schneider is like my second wife. It's like I just walked in on him and he's banging somebody else. That's what's going on right now, and I'm hurting. But you got to give me a little bit of time. You give me a couple hours, I might get over it.
Evan, if tomorrow had taught you any lesson, it should be that you can have someone that is cheating on his wife multiple times and give him enough time, and he will be a hero for people across the internet.
I have some Tiger Woods takes too, Brian, but we'll save that for another time.
I will. I'm going to take 1 second here. I have to admit, I was surprised by the reaction to the Masters yesterday. Like, I don't follow it that closely, but I do follow it closely enough to where I was like, wait a second. I'm all the way now. Someone who I am a huge fan of and is super smart and a friend of the show. And she was tweeting out positive messages about Tiger winning yesterday. And I'm like, whoa, usually you're pretty judicious about when you're praising someone who's been kind of a misogynist. And there's a lot of love for Tiger coming out from all corners. And that was a little surprising. The person that I heard today that didn't feel that way was Hugh Millen, of all people. It's weird. I heard him on the radio coming out and calling Tiger out, saying, I mean, he's not a guy I cheer for anymore. So I don't know. I thought that was weird. Did I miss something about where he redeemed himself?
Yeah, I got to hold my tongue here.
I think it's the thing that's pretty compelling to me, at least. I have conflicted about Tiger too, but the way Augusta and how golf treated him after all that, and he deserves criticism for it for sure, but for him to come back and win there's some bittersweetness there. Also, him aside from all the infidelity and whatnot, his road back from injuries has been pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, if it was just that, it'd be an easy story to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. I digress. I actually kind of want to provoke Evan to talk about Tiger Woods and see what comes of it.
I'll be in the Jersey burning ceremony.
Yeah, can you give us a hint of like why you need to keep your mouth shut about Tiger Woods?
I just chop my tongue off. Nope. Change the topic.
Gotta get him at the bar.
Yeah. So, look, guys. It does not look like we're going to get information one way or another about what's happening here before the show breaks, unless we're planning to stay up for another couple hours. And I at least on this, and I don't think I can manage that. But there is one other piece here that folks are asking that we at least talk about a little bit, and that is the Doug Baldwin news. I haven't seen anything new other than knowing about some of the injury stuff. Is there something new that's broken in the last week or so you guys know about?
Nope.
So
the last news I heard is that he's due for more surgery, but that was a week or two ago at least.
Yeah, that's my read as well. And last we talked about this, it was, I think we all were, entertaining the notion that he may not be back, like that's a possibility. And if that's the case, then we went through the Seahawks receivers on the roster, and it is thin. It is really thin. So that's the like scary side. On the other side, you could argue the Seahawks played pretty much the whole season without Doug Baldwin last year. Up until the last quarter of the season where he started producing, he was like a shadow of his former self in terms of production. So they did reasonably well without him. They did a lot better with him, but they did reasonably well without him. So that would be the upshot. And you'd hope for some growth from guys like David Moore, who's a guy we talked about. I think there's a sleeper on the roster at receiver. His name's Caleb Scott. He's not a guy that I would bet the farm on, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about him come the preseason in a few months. So we'll see. I think this is a strong receiver draft. And Jeff, you and Nathan both called out some players. Any new players on the draft side that have caught your attention that you want to talk to Seahawks fans about?
The one that I've really honed in on is Emmanuel Hall, and he's the one I wrote about a little bit. Hakeem Butler is one that comes up a lot. I like him a lot. JJ is it Arcega Whiteside?
Oh, the Stanford guy?
Yeah, J-Jaw. He's a guy that I've really kind of taken a shine to. Crap, I'm forgetting his name. One of the guys on Twitter who does a great job with all the draft stuff, did a good breakdown of him, and James Thomas has got a couple really good threads on him if you want to go check him out, making the case for him as a first-round guy, and it's pretty impressive stuff. So I guess he's kind of the new one for me that I've really kind of taken a shine to.
It seems like the Seahawks have been sniffing a lot around receivers. So it's been interesting. They've been looking at a lot of like early round big receivers. They had like NKL Harry. I don't know how to say his first name. They had him in. A lot of people have tied them to that Terry McLaurin from Ohio State. He's kind of a big play guy that would work well in play action, special teams guy. I love Hakeem Butler and Emmanuel Hall, the guys Nathan mentioned. And Deebo Samuel from South Carolina is a guy that's kind of grown on me. He's a separation receiver, and Russell's done really well with separation kind of receivers. He's the kind of guy that just like dominated the Senior Bowl, and he's kind of in that second round range. So it seems like the Seahawks are looking for like a receiver early, and they're looking a lot at slot receivers in like the end of the draft. So maybe they're going to go pretty hard on undrafted guys because they only have those 4 picks and they got a lot of room on their roster. So that's an area where they can really – that's how they found Doug in the first place, right? So that's an area I think they'll go, as well as I think they're going to get a big receiver early.
Yeah, I don't know where you guys are at in terms of priorities for the draft going in, but if the Seahawks can come out with a safety, a defensive lineman, preferably an edge. Although, anyway, a defensive lineman, I'll stick with that. And a receiver. Those are my top 3 priorities from a position perspective for the team. Where are you guys at from a position priority?
Pass rush is a real issue,
Yep.
especially if Frank Clark is gone.
Yep.
I'm not satisfied with corner either. I feel like it's a little bit glossed over due to Trey Flowers and Shaq, two kind of names in the Seahawks world. I'd be happier if I would not mind like a cornerback in the top 2 rounds. I think I haven't studied the cornerbacks enough to know their names super well, but I think that's an area of need. And wide receiver, obviously, which we talked about, is super important. It's kind of interesting to note, though, that the beat reporter tones have kind of shifted over the past week and a half, where it was kind of like Doug Baldwin's going to have surgery and we'll see how it's impacting him, to now it's using verbiage of like, to see what Doug Baldwin decides, implying like a retirement. So it's something to watch for sure.
I think safety, defensive line, wide receiver are the big ones for me. Corner is one that is important. They like to go that way a little later, which works well for them. It's a good draft for sea hockey type corners, so that's nice. The sequencing of safety, wide receiver, and defensive line will be really interesting. I think it's going to be tough for them to get an impact safety and an impact defensive lineman. I mean, obviously, just they're so limited in picks. And so what they decide to do there with trading down and all that, I think it's going to be a little easier for them to grab a wide receiver, maybe a little bit, in the mid rounds, a little bit later. So kind of seeing whether they want to make a splash wide receiver, where there are some definite guys at the top that are kind of splash worthy. Or if they want to go after, safety or defensive line, and then try to find, it's a deep wide receiver class, so try to pick one of those deeper wide receivers.
Jeff, any difference there for you?
No, those are the big positions for me. I think we talked about free safety play all year. This is a pretty good draft for the Seahawks type of free safety. There's a couple guys that Seahawks have met with already. There's middle round guys, and everything kind of sets up for the Seahawks moving down a couple times and being able to hit those 3 spots. D-line that John mentioned is the strength of the draft. Safety, free safety, Tedrick just wasn't good enough last year. And receiver, they need at least 2 of them in this draft, whether that comes in the draft or UDFAs. Maybe tight end if you can get one, if Disley's being managed back, and who knows how long Ed Dixon's going to be around. Manette's in the last year of his deal. I wouldn't mind somewhere there. But I guess backup quarterback if Russell Wilson's getting traded next year. But other than that, no, we cover the main ones.
Yeah, that's the other interesting thing with how this Russ thing shakes out. If you are trying to take a Will Greer in like the 2nd round or a little bit higher, wherever you might be able to get him, then that complicates things, because it is a deep safety draft. But the guys who are true free safeties, which is what you'd want if you're looking to replace Tedrick, there's not as many of those. Like people seem really enamored with Rapp, and he's not a free safety, and he didn't test well enough where you can squint at him and say, well, maybe he can figure it out. Did I cut out again?
No. I was just saying, I interrupted totally rudely, but he was just saying he tested really slowly. I mean, his 40 time was like 4.7.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was real bad.
So
yeah. Now there's other guys like Amani Hooker, who's another guy that I wrote about, and he tested well. So even though he's more of a strong safety type, you can kind of look at him and say, well, maybe you can do something with him. And he's a guy that you can get a little later. So it kind of depends on what they want to do in terms of projects. I thought it was interesting, and Schneider in one of his recent press conferences, or maybe the radio interview, was talking about how he's really relied on the guys around him to talk him out of guys, where he's looked at guys and it's like, well, maybe we can do this with him, or get him to do this, or teach him that. And then some of the guys in the front office around him are kind of like, yeah, but do you really want to try to do that? Like, do you want to spend the time and effort? And he's like, no, maybe not. And it was I thought it was kind of candid, and it was really interesting. So that's kind of shaded my idea of what they might do in this draft, is that they might not look for as many. They'll probably still look for projects and all that, because they're really big on teaching and all that, but they might not look like Ben Banagoo is a guy, or I can never remember how to say his name. He's a guy that requires some projecting, and I don't know if they actually really want to try to do that this year.
Well, lots going on there. We got the news that doesn't really qualify as news last week, that the Seahawks are one of the teams really trying to move down in the draft. That shocked absolutely nobody, and that's most likely what's gonna happen there. We have not yet gotten the news about any deal with Russell, so we'll definitely be ending the show before that breaks, it looks like. With our luck, it will probably break 5 minutes after we're done with the show. That's happened before. And I do also want to give a plug before we wrap up here. This Thursday night is the Seahawks auction, the dinner with the Benefits Ben's Fund. It's when we make our annual donation from the blog, and all of you that are patrons have been a big part of that. Over at patreon.com, patreon.com/hawkblogger. We've raised over $100,000 and donated over $100,000 from the site, and we're gonna increase that again this year. So if you can join, one of the cool things is if you're a $5 member or more, then I will work to try to get you a phone call or a tweet or something from one of your favorite players. So it's Frank Clark. It'll be interesting to see if he's there. A lot of times this auction is where you find out, which players are at odds with the front office. So we'll see if Frank Clark there. We'll see if Russell Wilson's there. And B, you usually get a pretty good read on some of the players that John Schneider believes in that nobody else knows about there. So that's one of the places where I met J.D. McKissick, had a long conversation with him. It's a place where I, met Bradley McDougald, and we talked to a bunch about what's going on there. Talked to a bunch of the offensive linemen. There's a lot of guys there. So I'm happy to pass that back along to some of the folks that are Hawk Blogger patrons. Sign up, it's not too late, and I'll be able to try to get you a call. Otherwise, please follow us. Please subscribe if you haven't already to the show. This is helpful for the show. It's great to just tell somebody if you don't want to subscribe. Let someone know about the show, youtube.com/hawkblogger, or on any of the podcast channels. So you can find us on Stitcher, on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Play, or Google Play, iTunes, all that kind of stuff. So give us a follow there, subscribe, and we'll keep this show going. So we will be back for sure when there's more news to talk about. I think the next show is likely to be the week after next, but we will see. Seahawks news may force a different schedule. With that, thank you to Evan at EvanOnHB on Twitter, Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons, and Nathan Ernst at NathanE11. Thanks, guys, for joining us again, and go Hawks.